Shut up and sit down.
By all means, go for it. Have fun. Just leave me alone.
People are coming together more and more and more and more as the government has been failing us more and more.
I'm against being shitty to people.
You can't research your way into understanding somebody.
One way or another, I'd rather have the fight now.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Fight for Liberty Live. Tonight, we have an awesome show for you guys. I'm super excited. Another returning guest. But first, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about our sponsor, Thomas Queer, State Senate in the 52nd District. You guys have already heard me talk about him. If you've been watching the show for a while, you saw him come on the show last year while he was running for the same seat. But he is running again, and with a lot more momentum, a lot better of a team, and we're hoping a lot more donations. So if you want to help us out with that part of it, there's a link in the description, or you can go to tomfor52.com/donate and give us a couple bucks. Campaigning is expensive. Staff is to help. But once again, today, I'm actually really excited. We're talking to one of the most interesting dudes in the Liberty movement, back again from Young Americans for Liberty, Mr. Eric Brakey. Welcome back.
Hey, David, glad to be on with you. It's been a little while.
Yeah, it has. It's been an interesting year.
Yeah. That's kind of putting it very mildly. I don't know that any of us alive have ever seen quite a year like this. Well, other than last year.
Fair. I don't know. This is significantly more fun than last year.
I'm sorry. I'm getting a little bit of a delay. I hope it's not screwing up too much.
Yeah, there's a little bit. That's probably on my end. Honestly, at this point, I just assume that technical difficulties are going to happen every show.
Well, let me make sure I got all my tabs closed so I'm not like... Anyway. But yeah, no, it's good to talk with you. And sorry about this. It's probably the NSA trying to slow things down so we can't have this great conversation about liberty.
Okay, there we go. We better?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. Jesus. I was trying to fiddle with something and my entire internet just disconnected from my laptop. I was like, oh thanks.
Yeah.
That's great. I agree. It's definitely the NSA. They don't like it when we talk about liberty or freedom or anything like that. So they got to come and shut us down.
Edward Snowden tried to warn us.
Amen. So I introduced you as one of the most interesting people in the liberty movement. And I truly believe that. I think you're one of the people that I could have on like a dozen times and still not talk about all the interesting stuff you've done between your work on Ron Paul's campaign, your work as a state senator, your own race for U.S. Senate, the stuff you've done with Yao. Now you have a podcast. Like you're how do you keep all of these things together under the umbrella of Eric Brakey?
I don't know. It's all just been kind of one step at a time. If you had asked me when I got into the liberty movement, as a young person, like 22, 23 years old, if this is where my life's course would have taken me, would have thought you're pretty crazy. I wanted to be a professional actor in New York City. That's what I was going to do with my life. So it's been kind of a wild ride, and it's really just kind of going every day, every step of the way, kind of asking yourself, what is the thing I can do right now to best promote the cause of liberty with this moment in my life? And it's just been a wild ride. Never takes me places I've never expected I was going to be.
That's a really important question to ask yourself. What can I be doing right now to make the biggest difference for liberty? I encourage everyone to ask themselves that question a lot, because I think we like to, just human nature is to kind of find somewhere that you're comfortable, not push too many boundaries and kind of, stick with the same thing. So it's pretty easy to get into something that maybe was the best thing for liberty a decade ago. And, you're still trying to push this one random issue that no one cares about anymore.
Yeah. an older guy. I guess I call myself an older guy in the Liberty movement just because I'm around so many Zoomers these days. I feel like the old guy, but it's very easy for someone of my generation to be kind of still caught in 2012, fighting the same battles, as we were fighting, 12 years ago against, I'm sorry, 9 years ago against Barack Obama and all that. But in a lot of ways, the problems are the same, but also the times change, the problems evolve, and we've got to be kind of on our toes, wrestling with the topics of tyranny that pop up day to day. I think this is where a lot of people in the Liberty movement, got stuck when kind of COVID started happening and all of these tyrannical lockdown policies started happening. A lot of people still wanted to be stuck in, fighting the battles of the previous decade, fighting the battles that are still very important, like repealing, civil asset forfeiture laws and all of these. And there's great battles being won on civil asset forfeiture, and that's something to be celebrated. But I think a lot of people got blindsided that this was becoming such an important issue that needed to be addressed from a liberty perspective. And a lot of libertarians kind of missed out on this. They're getting in the fight now and over the course of the last year, which is great. I think the movement is very unified on the need to resist kind of the COVID regime. But yeah, no, we gotta roll with whatever the regime throws at us.
Yeah, 2021 carried a very different energy when it came to COVID than 2020 did. Because I feel like I was one of those libertarians that got caught in the, maybe, I'm not a doctor. I don't know what I'm talking about. We're gonna just kind of keep sticking to what we know, keep talking about the issues that we know about. And especially like when George Floyd happened, it kind of shifted a lot of the conversation back into something that I knew really well. I've been doing criminal justice activism pretty much the whole time I've been in the movement. So I was like, yeah, I'm back into here. And, I'm like, we'll let the doctors figure that out. Like, I don't want to be advocating for doing things that might kill people. And we don't know if that's what we're advocating for. So, yeah, now we know the danger, and we know that it's tyranny and not for our health.
Well, it certainly is hard. And I know I was, back when we were in the first 2 weeks, and it was all we just got to do 15 days to stop the spread. And the whole line was, well, we need to prepare our hospitals and buy them time because there's just going to be a flood of cases. And, it made a certain kind of sense. And in that moment where we didn't know what we were dealing with, I think it was very understandable to just be like, all right, maybe this is the time we've got to listen to these government appointed experts. But then you start to hear more and more other experts, because again, you and I aren't doctors. We're not virologists or immunologists. These aren't our areas of expertise, certainly not mine. I mean, I've worked on healthcare policy for years, but I don't claim to be a scientist. But then you start hearing from scientists like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University, Martin Koldorf of Harvard. You've got epidemiologists across the country who aren't as connected to these government agendas, who are standing up and saying, you guys are going about it the wrong way. Why are you doing it the worst way possible? Why aren't you focusing protection on the most vulnerable? Why are you pushing all of these universal lockdowns that don't make any sense and come with so many other negative ramifications in people's lives, even worse than, the virus itself? I mean, suicide rates are up, substance abuse rates are up. I mean, our society's been devastated, not to mention all the people thrown out of their work, the huge expansions of the money supply, eroding people's savings. Like they launched us into what will be one of the most defining and just worst moments in American history, with one of the biggest wealth transfers from the poor and middle class to the politically well-connected rich. And at the same time, they've got this great issue that just they get to use to divide us and get regular people fighting each other. It's the divide and conquer strategy that kind of political elites use against us, where they try to put you in these boxes and say, oh, you're for Black Lives Matter and you're for All Lives Matter. You guys are enemies. Now go fight each other while we rob you of all of your savings and do nothing to actually address the systemic problems in this system. Just blame the other guy and scapegoat, the other half of America. So it's brilliant what they're doing. It's terribly evil. And I hope that American people will one day wake up and realize that we're being manipulated.
Yeah, it sucks when you have to like give credit where credit is due to like good tyrants that are like not good people, but good at being tyrants.
Oh yeah, I mean Julius Caesar was a brilliant, brilliant in what he did. He was still, he was an emperor, and he basically ended the Republic of Rome and instituted an empire. It's like, wow, you got to recognize the brilliance in how he pulled that off. But it was a very evil thing to do, and there are a lot of folks trying to do that to America today.
Yeah, I've always been, and I probably shouldn't say it like this, but I've always been kind of a fan of Mussolini's rise to power, because he took over an entire country without firing a single bullet. He just walked into the Capitol and was like, "Hey guys, I'm in charge now," and they were like, "Okay." That's basically what happened, and it confuses me a lot.
I got to admit that I'm not as well studied on Mussolini's rise to power, but.
I did a research paper on him in like 9th grade, so I know way more about him than I should.
So tell me, how did he do it? How did he pull it off? Maybe it's a good lesson to know for our contemporary situation, so we can avoid that.
Well, he basically came in. So he was a military leader, and at the time, Italy was basically back into a theocracy where the religious leaders were the political leaders, and he just walked into the Capitol with the entire army, and it was like army versus church, who's gonna win? It's pretty clear. And so there just wasn't a battle. It was just he came in with the army and with the firepower and was like, you guys actually want to die, or do you want to just give me the crown?
He did it Julius Caesar style. He crossed the Rubicon.
But yeah, this the regime that they've been pushing for the last 2 years, and they've gotten so good at the divide and conquer with all of the different issues, whether it's gun control or it's the Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, or Back the Blue, thrown in there, and you have just too many issues now, and now we're throwing in vaccines and masks and all this other stuff, and they have us fighting over masks instead of fighting over tyranny.
Right. And it's, I mean, the way that they use junk science there was a study that just came out recently. I saw it was shared by a guy who was one of the original inventors of mRNA vaccine technology. And so he's sharing this study, and this is what he was cautioning from early on. He was suggesting that the overuse of the mRNA, which is really a gene therapy, not a traditional vaccine, the overuse of these gene therapies on the whole population, including people who are not vulnerable to COVID, is kind of going to have a similar impact to when you overuse antibiotics, right? You're going to create strains of germs that are resistant to antibiotics. And, interestingly enough, we're seeing strains of the coronavirus emerge that are resistant to all of these mRNA vaccines. And there's a study that just came out showing that you see kind of a correlation between the very high vaccination rates in America and Europe and the rise of these resistant strains of the coronavirus. And so what's funny is it's tragic. What they've been telling us all along, and you even see this when you recently watched the View, all the folks on the View are, kind of getting all up in arms about this. It's these unvaccinated people who are the reason why all of these variants are coming about and spreading. And look, I'm not a scientist. I'm going just based on the research that I'm reading of others and other people with degrees who are the experts. But there are some real early signs indicating that it's the exact opposite of what they're telling us. And so it would have been, personally, I think the mRNA technology is fascinating and could do great things. And if you had taken that and you had focused that on like the truly vulnerable, that would have been a huge benefit. But instead, they wanted to make it a silver bullet and say this is going to fix everything. And they impose it on everyone in such a universal fashion, even though we have the data, the studies coming out now showing that these vaccines, these gene therapies don't even slow down in a significant way the infection and transmission rates. So it's helpful for you as a person. It lowers the risk of you getting a severe case of COVID and ending up hospitalized or dead, which if you're someone who is in a vulnerable category is huge. That's important. But it doesn't have a significant impact on infection and transmission rates. So the fact that we're even talking about imposing this on children now who are already at such a low risk, when they're already not vectors for spreading the disease in a significant fashion, and even if they were, this wouldn't make a difference. It's gross, and it's being used to divide us. It's being used to scapegoat people who, can read the writing on the wall that it's not what they claim it to be. But they get us fighting while they rob us blind, and that's, I think, the real plan.
Yeah. So you were the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee when you were in the state Senate in Maine. How would you have handled that kind of a role if you were still there when COVID broke out?
Yeah. Well, hindsight's 2020. So it's I like to say that I would make the same decisions then I would have made today with all the knowledge of the last 2 years. I like to think I would. I hope I would have. I know that, when all this was going on, I was one of the first first person in the Republican congressional race kind of standing up and saying these lockdowns are crazy. This doesn't make any sense, and going to open Maine rallies. But anyway, as far as policy, I would have adopted the recommendations of the Great Barrington Declaration that have been authored by epidemiologists at Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard. And what they called for was a focused protection model, where you focus resources on those in vulnerable health categories, so seniors and those with underlying health conditions that we know create elevated risk for severe COVID cases. We have focused resources on them, helping to, as therapeutics came along, making sure they get first access. They get first access to vaccines if they choose that. We're not going to force anyone to do anything, but we make those resources available to them first. And for the rest of society who's at low risk, we recognize that, the real weakness of this virus is that it is so lopsided and disproportionate in terms of who it affects. I think that so many public policy folks were so overconfident in their ability to establish policies that would be able to stamp out this virus, and that's being generous, assuming good intentions. They were overconfident in their ability that we could somehow stamp this out, when really recognizing that what we needed to do was we needed to find a way to develop herd immunity in society the best way that we could. And with the fact that so many people were at such low risk, allow those people to live their lives. Yeah, everyone's going to eventually get COVID. But if the people who get COVID first are the people who are at very low risk, then that's how you build up herd immunity and through natural immunity in society. And at the end of the day, you get to a point where the virus cannot spread so easily across society, and that protects the most vulnerable at the end of the day. So the folks in the Great Barrington Declaration have recommended that those with natural immunity be the ones who are treating the most vulnerable patients in nursing homes. We've had so many nursing home deaths because the strategies have been so backwards. Now to the point where we're firing people. We have governors across the country, including President Joe Biden, trying to fire people with natural immunity from being healthcare workers. It just runs counter to so many of the recommendations of many very well-qualified epidemiologists who are looking at this in a way that is different than Anthony Fauci, who has huge conflicts of interest in this and should never have been put in a position to be the voice that we're following through all these last 2 years.
Yeah, well, especially given his history, like we already know who Fauci is and what he stands for and what he wants to do. I've loved that we finally, this is becoming more and more known. I saw a couple pictures going around last week of a protest back in the 70s where somebody's holding a sign that says, "Fauci, you're killing us." And it's like, this has been a thing that he's been trying to do for quite some time. He has been a vaccine happy nut job the whole time he's been in power, and he's been in his position for 40 something years. He's not a great guy. We knew this. Yeah.
It is interesting. Now I try, I'm not a mind reader. I try to assign to people the best possible intentions I can, though it's very hard sometimes, especially with him. But if nothing else, you look at the AIDS panic. And Anthony Fauci was there right in the center of it, just telling people that AIDS might be airborne, and you don't want to be in close proximity to people with AIDS, and kind of creating this panic that really gripped a lot of right-wing America, and really really create a lot of stigma and harm for people in the gay community in America at the time. So it's kind of interesting that Anthony Fauci has become this hero of the left these days, because you go back to the 1980s and he was the one getting Republicans to mask up because they were afraid of gay people with AIDS. And that was Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, and he tried to develop a vaccine to treat AIDS that killed people.
Yeah. I guess I'd heard that. I don't know I don't know the whole story there.
Yeah, that's an oversimplification of that story that I probably shouldn't say. But still, it's the truth, and it's it's just a continuation of a story that I feel like people should have seen coming. They also pretend like he wasn't in the same position doing the same things for both Trump and Bush and other Bush. He's not a Democrat. He's bipartisan.
Have you ever read The Fountainhead?
I actually have not.
Well, there's a character in The Fountainhead. He is he's like the great villain of The Fountainhead. His name is Ellsworth Toohey. If you read the descriptions of Ellsworth Toohey, he's this guy that everyone thinks is this great, just cares so much about. Anyway, I can't do it justice, but anyone who knows The Fountainhead know that Ayn Rand was writing about Dr. Fauci. I mean, it pretty much could be every description of Ellsworth Toohey in that could be verbatim applied to Dr. Fauci. But I guess if you haven't read The Fountainhead, I can't do it justice.
I'm gonna upset a lot of my viewers by admitting that I've never read any of Ayn Rand.
You should. I know. Even if there's stuff to disagree with, and she was a bit of a Puritan in her own sense, like with her kind of like ideological purity tests, which I think we're all too familiar with in the liberty movement still to these days. But her writings, I think, are The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. It's like we're going through both of these books at the same time right now.
Yeah, it's not anything against her. I'm honestly fairly poorly read when it comes to liberty movement stuff in general, which I'm working on.
There's great audiobooks on there. You got a long ride in the car, you can just throw on Audible and you'll get through it.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I just finished The Law by Frederick Bastiat last night.
That's an important
which was great. On Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau is next on the list. So
awesome.
We're getting there. We're starting to check off some of these books. About 3/4 of the way through 1984. That's also on my list to finish by the end of the year.
Oh yeah.
So we're gonna.
What do you see what do you see as you're reading 1984? What do you see in there that kind of strikes you as, especially in the COVID 1984 that we're in?
Yeah, that part was really weird because I started reading it in early 20 or like or late 2019, so before any of this shit started, and I've been reading it slowly over the last 2 years because I'm really bad at reading things quickly, and the more and more stuff that happens, the more the book stands out, and it's really creepy how eerily similar some of the stuff is to what's going on in the book, and like especially just the straight up rewriting of history and of all narratives. I've had just so many of my various like ideas of what the world is shattered over the last probably 3 or 4 years working in this movement, learning about like the move bombing of Philadelphia or the Tulsa race massacre or the Tuskegee experiments or all of these terrible things that are just omitted from the history books. I learned that there was an attack during one of the world wars where a bomb went off in Jersey, and that's why the torch on the Statue of Liberty has been closed for years. And I didn't know that there was any like actual attacks on U.S. soil other than Pearl Harbor during the world wars. Like just so many different things where I'm like, what else don't I know about history? What else have they rewritten? It's terrifying to think how far into that storyline we already were even before 2020.
I think you get to a certain age, and hopefully you begin to realize, at least I certainly did when I got to a certain age, that the history that we're taught is much more akin to a mythology than a history. It's based on a lot of true events, but it's cultivated in such a way as to give us the impression of the world and the government and that we live under that they would like us to have. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's for good reasons, for noble reasons. Sometimes it's for less noble reasons. Sometimes it's because people honestly want us to, think of America more for the ideals that we've tried to set out and make happen in the world than for all the failures that human beings have, had in living up to those ideals along the way. Mm-hmm. But also some of it's just like to really have us not realize just how evil and corrupt the government around us is, and the crimes that have been committed by the state, and also it's great crimes that happen that we're also outside the state, but just kind of protected groups. I think you bring up. I always think of the bombing of Black Wall Street. It's a story that I'd never really even heard of until several years ago. This was never something that was taught in school. I mean, here you had African Americans, and I think this was this in Oklahoma. Was this related? And maybe this was related to Tulsa.
I think it's two different things.
Yeah,
that happened similarly in similar locations, like 100 years apart from each other.
Okay, but just to think that you have huge African American communities that had really started finding economic success by using the market, using the ideals of this country, the ideals by using their economic liberties had started to achieve kind of real success, and people destroyed that. People came in and they like people flew as I understand, people flew like crop planes and like drop bombs on this on this. And I don't know the full history. I try not to speak about things that I'm not haven't thoroughly researched, but it is something that's just kind of eye-opening when you start to think some of the crimes and the real grievances that people have that have taken place in past generations and things that still take place today. Sometimes though, we just have to try to give each other the benefit of the doubt that people are really trying to mean well. And how do we best, how do we handle some of the history of our country, the darker moments in our country, and how do we extend grace to each other to try to know how do we live with each other and really, build a better future together.
Yeah. And I think your lack of knowledge on that makes your point better than you being able to fully explain what that bombing was. Because, why do I know like in distinct detail dozens of different battles from like World War I, but I didn't know anything about what you're talking about until I was in my 20s because of Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter have taught me more history than my history textbooks did. That's sad.
Yeah. It's it's funny the things that these historical figures, when we find out that they were human beings and we find out that they were imperfect and they were not the saints that we were told that they are, it can be really difficult to grapple with sometimes. I mean, we think about these figures from Washington to Jefferson to Lincoln to FDR. All these figures who are deified in some sense or another as part of this like American mythology of the great figures we're supposed to admire and look up to. But you actually you look into their actual lives and you'll see the things that was great about them and was wonderful about them and why they are people that we hold up and we as examples. But then you also start to see the ways that they were human and flawed and did not live up to the ideals that they set out. I mean, I don't want to. I could pick on some of my favorites like FDR, but maybe that wouldn't be fair because our own heroes have their own faults too.
Yeah, I mean, FDR is one of the easier ones. I admitted last night that my least favorite president used to be Truman because he didn't let us attack and bomb China. That used to be that was Kid David. He was a little neocon. Douglas MacArthur was like my favorite.
I was there before too, so I don't blame you. Maybe not a bombing China, but I bought all that propaganda hook, line, and sinker for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mythology is strong, and it's you want to believe it, like, because it's great. It sounds awesome. Like, you live in this bastion of freedom. I think growing up in the church makes that definitely adds to that mythology, because we have the religious freedom and we talk about that constantly too. So I actually just kind of noticed this a couple weeks ago. I was at a prayer meeting for my dad's church, and like every single person that prayed thanked God for the great bastion of freedom that is America, that we're able to meet and have this prayer meeting. And it's like, okay, but A, you could do this in most countries in the world now. And B, you were told for 9 months you couldn't do this, and none of you even batted an eye or fought back in any way, shape, or form. What are we talking about here? What freedoms are we talking about?
You know, it is interesting in one sense that this idea of religious freedom as we understand it today did start in a major way in America with Thomas Jefferson pushing for kind of the separation of church and state and the de-establishment of the church, the church in Virginia, which spread across the country, and how different that was. And, you know, it has become, you know, very important, you know, a lot of places across the world. We certainly see the places that certainly don't have that. You know, you can look in certain Middle Eastern countries where you can get stoned for practicing the wrong religion. But yeah, what we have today is, in some ways, it's kind of a shadow of what was when the government can just come in and shut down the churches, tell you can't get together with people, you can't practice your faith. In fact, you shouldn't get together for Christmas. You shouldn't get together for, you know, religious holidays, especially on, you know, on science that is been grossly distorted and misinterpreted. Yeah, it's kind of, you begin to question, what religious liberty do we still have in America?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what really angered me about that prayer meeting is that we were praying about like the persecuted church elsewhere, and pretty much everybody, all but like a small handful of the people that prayed, also said something along the lines of like, if we're ever persecuted, I pray that you'll give me the strength to fight back and to stand my ground the way that those guys over in whatever country are. And I'm just sitting there like, no, you wouldn't. You didn't. Like,
this is the opportunity right now.
Yeah, we already saw that. And like that church specifically didn't even go to like online meetings very quickly or anything like that. Like they were just like, oh, guess we don't have church. And for 3 months, like no Christianity happened in that, or, you know, like nothing was going on in that community for 3 months.
Yeah, I think that, like, I don't want to try to be a critique of people's interpretation of faith. But I guess I'll just say this. I really do appreciate, you know, in Maine, there were some awesome churches that like refused to shut down, that stayed open, that sued the government. And whatever you believe, you know, if you fully agree with all of their, you know, their faith and their interpretation of things or not, like, how awesome to see that at least in some pockets of America, that spirit of American liberty is still alive, that people are still willing to fight for it. And I would just hope that was true in Christian communities and Muslim communities and Jewish communities. You know, this kind of idea of religious liberty is supposed to extend to people of all faiths, that we can all get together, practice how we want. And the government's authority does not cross the barrier of the church or the synagogue or the mosque or wherever you choose to practice your faith.
Mm-hmm. It was kind of disheartening, but also encouraging in some ways to see the Jewish community like kick the Christian community's ass in this regard in 2020. Like they fought back way harder, especially in New York City. I was still in Brooklyn for part of the beginnings of this, and they were just getting out by the tens of thousands to just be like, nah, fuck you, I'm not staying home. And that was awesome. Like there were few other groups in the world that were pushing back as hard and as quickly as the Jewish community in New York City, and I was all for it.
Awesome. I guess when you've gone through a couple generations of kind of historical oppression, you're one of the first to stand up and fight back. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All I could think of throughout the first couple months of, especially like the church lockdowns and stuff. Have you seen the Left Behind films with Kirk Cameron?
I haven't seen them, but I'm familiar with them.
Okay, so in the third movie, there's like a plague that hits all of the survivors of the rapture. That's what it's called. And the cure for that plague, they find out, is communion. So like one of these churches like does a communion and like everybody gets better, and then like they start like doing it and like people get better because communion. And obviously it's like a plague from God, so obviously the cure is from God, and like it's a little bit different. But all I could think of the whole time of this is like, what if that's the case? What if the cure was communion, and none of you guys took communion for a year, and you're all gonna die the same as all the non-Christians because you didn't do the thing that you were asked to do?
It's like this was the plague to test your faith, and you failed. You let them shut down the churches, and you didn't take communion.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be ironic?
How awesome would it have been for the world church if we saw 9 months into this thing that all the churches that said "fuck you," we're still gonna meet, like had 0 deaths, 0 cases, just nothing. Like God protected them clearly. And they were able to like actually show that, would have been the greatest like missionary story they possibly, like the church has had in centuries at this point.
Yeah.
But they just missed out on that. Obviously, I don't believe that would have happened necessarily because I'm not a Christian. But if you believe that, then you would believe that that's a possibility, and no one actually had the faith to.
It sounds like maybe an interesting Babylon Bee premise.
But, MJ, if you're watching this, go write an article.
It is interesting. I think when you're just talking about the power of the state, the power of established religion. I've come to think more and more that you can kind of break down these power structures in society into kind of these 3 categories. You've got the power of the church, the power of the state, and the power of the marketplace, the power of commerce. And I think that, Jefferson and many of the founders who followed his lead were very wise to want to separate these power structures of church and state. It's very dangerous when these power structures come together. And it's not necessarily that the state corrupts religion or the religion corrupts state. It's that the 2 things kind of together corrupt each other. Once you introduce force and violence into the ability to compel people to worship how you think they want, and to force them to tithe to the churches that the state establishes. So they were wise in kind of separating this. But as in modern America, as kind of these kind of religious institutions have really kind of diminished in their own I guess adherence in society. It's not that people are choosing one church over another or one faith over another. It's that we're generally becoming less and less religious. And I just had an interesting conversation with Andrew Heaton about this, who's a host of the Political Orphanage podcast. Very interesting guy. He does a lot of those Reason Magazine videos where it's like the 2 mayors who are freaking out in the COVID epidemic. Anyway, he's a funny guy. Love that guy. But anyway, he was talking about how, as we become less religious, whether you're kind of religious or not, but as we become less religious and supposedly more secular, we haven't really become less religious. It's like there's something in the human spirit that wants to worship something. And we've just shifted our worship to the state and to this kind of new COVID religion of Fauciism. where I tell people, I respect your right to wear your rosary, but or wear I don't know. Basically, these masks. Like, I respect your right to wear your religious garments, whatever you want, but like, I'm not I'm not going to be compelled to do so. But
yeah,
but
I don't know if you know Reed Coverdale.
Yeah,
he had
naturalist capitalist, right?
Yeah, he had a great quote that used to be in his intro video, where he goes, "As the right becomes more and more religious, they become more and more statist, and as the left becomes less and less religious, they still become more and more statist."
Well, it is interesting. I mean, I guess there's a degree to which, like, a lot of folks on the right become statist when they become more religious. I mean, I think it's ultimately it's the ring of power, right? When any established power structure can, if the church gets the opportunity to put on the ring of power, they become tyrannical. If big corporations get the opportunity to put on the ring of power, they become tyrannical. Kind of the merging of any of these power structures with the state becomes a very dangerous thing. You get theocracy, or you get fascism, or communism. Any of these kind of isms, and it's why, like, just so important. You just keep these power structures separate. We need a separation of church and state. We need a separation of money and state. And but we don't really seem to have that real separation of church and state now, because it's the new religion is a state religion.
Yeah. So we were talking earlier about kind of the humanality of some of our heroes, and you're no stranger to controversy in yourself between like stuff going on in the Ron Paul campaign. You had like the Vita Coco commercial during your state Senate campaign. Now stuff with Yao. Just how do you kind of stay above the fray, and how do you? Or what would you suggest to people who want to become politicians or activists but are afraid of some of the skeletons in their closet, like funny commercials?
Yeah, so you reference when I was a professional actor in New York City, before I ever thought I was in the Ron Paul movement, and I was like as a grassroots activist, but I never imagined this was the path the road I was going to end up going down. I did a commercial for Vita Coco coconut water that happened to feature, it was a funny, family-friendly commercial showing like, hey, you drink Vita Coco coconut water, you feel Brazilian, you want to dance. So it happened to feature a lot of men of various shapes, sizes, and colors dancing in Brazilian swimsuits. So, and when I ran for state Senate, someone found that, and that became a big story for some reason. It was like national news, and they bring it up every single election cycle. But every election cycle, I think for the most part, people kind of, when they know the context, they just kind of laugh about it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that you got to remember that it's not about you; it's about a cause that's bigger than you, and you're here to serve that. Like, I just think about how Ron Paul just went at it for 30 years, and he was ridiculed. He was, he was there in Congress pretty much all by himself for 30 years, being Dr. No, and it didn't really pay off until like the end of his political career, when we had this explosion of the Liberty movement because of the work that he had done and the ground that he'd laid. So when it gets tough and when there's kind of crazy stuff going around, just try to be as authentic as possible to yourself and to what you believe, and maybe it'll go your way, maybe it won't. But I find that the only thing you can never recover from is losing yourself and losing your authenticity, and losing your fall into the dark side. So don't do that. But yeah, it's interesting. I think that there's these kind of like two opposing concepts that I think it's important for people in the liberty movement, especially those who want to seek public office, to hold in their mind. And it's trying to balance these two contrasting values of confidence and humility, because you got to have enough confidence. You got to have enough big enough ego to go out there and think, I've got something to say and you should listen to it. Like, but if you let it become about you, if you let it become about your own ego and your own self-aggrandizement and not about the larger cause that you believe in, you go to some pretty funny places. And I think especially in a movement like ours, which is so focused on individualism and respect for the individual, the danger is that we can develop egos that are bigger than the movement in our own minds. And we start asking, not how do we advance the cause of liberty, but how do we advance ourselves and promote ourselves? So be confident, know that you got a message that's worth fighting for, but remember that it's about the message and the cause, and it's not about you.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I feel like there's a lot of people that I talk to that, would make decent politicians, would be able to run for office with a degree of success. But when you talk to them about it, they are like, oh, I could never run for office because blank reason, something that they've done in the past. And I feel like a good chunk of people would put that commercial in that category of like, oh, well, I can't run for office. I was in a commercial in my underwear, and that's, and they'll just completely disqualify themselves from running for public office because they used to have an OnlyFans, or they they got arrested when they were in college for being drunk at a party. And it's like, these things don't honestly matter as much, I think, as people think they do.
Yeah. Donald Trump got elected president. Look at all the skeletons in his closet. I mean, at a certain time, especially these days, more and more people have gotten sick of the inauthenticity of politics. They've gotten sick of the cardboard or plastic Ken dolls, the Mitt Romneys and the Bill Clintons and I guess Bill Clinton turned out to be someone who had his own skeletons in his closet. But people crave authenticity. That's why Ron Paul was so popular. It's why Bernie Sanders is so popular. It's why Donald Trump is so popular. You can agree or disagree with these folks, but maybe some of them are issuing some bullshit, but they're not doing it in the same traditional sense. People feel like they're authentic, or they're at least delivering truths the establishment doesn't want people to hear. Yeah. And that's what people crave. So at the end of the day, come along with that is being a real human being. And I think especially as we are kind of more and more in a society where privacy is disappearing, we're just going to have to get used to that more and more, that our elected officials are human beings. Many of them have done things in their past that maybe are embarrassing. And you know what? For the older generations, I guess, be grateful that YouTube wasn't a thing when you were in college. Social media didn't exist.
Right.
And for young people now, just remember that those things do follow you for the rest of your life. It's a permanent record. So, think twice. Think twice about some of the, the crazy things you do in college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've even had people express just their social media accounts as reasons for why they could never run for office. It's like, have you seen the shit that I tweet? I couldn't run for office. And then you look at someone like Spike Cohen, who has just no shame on a lot of this stuff and is just unapologetically himself, and a fucking weirdo at that, and still has the popularity. He's still respected. He was like millions of people cast their vote for him.
He's an impressive dude.
People. So yeah, I 100% agree that the authentic nature is important in politics now, and I really think that the liberty movement lacks that a lot. A lot of people, especially if they're coming from a more conservative side, they miss the days of those like buttoned up Mitt Romney types, and we try to, still have the blazer and tie kind of thing going.
Yeah. The only thing I miss about Mitt Romney is beating up on him. I guess he is a gift that keeps giving, though. I guess he's in the Senate now. We can still beat up on him.
Honestly, Mitt Romney is what got me into politics. Not because I really liked him that much, but I liked what he did with politics and kind of I liked his resume. I liked the fact that he had a resume previously to being a politician, and that he like actually did some stuff with his life before the job that is being a politician.
Yeah, and that is something to respect. I mean, when it comes to, and I know Ron Paul had a decent relationship on a personal level with Mitt Romney when they were on the campaign trail. I think that they're both gentlemen. I know that Ron did not have a similar relationship with people like Rick Santorum, who was an asshole to be honest. So I'm told, behind the scenes and on the debate stage. But Mitt Romney is a gentleman. For the most part, his campaign did some incredibly underhanded things, including kicking elected Ron Paul delegates out of that national convention in 2012, something I don't think I'll ever forgive Mitt Romney for. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we got to remove kind of the personalities from this. There are a lot of really nice politicians, people who are genuinely nice people with impressive resumes who do, you meet them in regular life. You think this is a nice person, great person, kind person. I trust this person to watch my kids or take care of my dog. But at the end of the day, when they get into office, they support like mass genocide campaigns in the Middle East. Right. They support putting people in cages for smoking marijuana, like by the millions. I mean, they are guilty of supporting incredible evils in this world. And maybe it's with the best of intentions. Maybe they just don't know better. Or maybe they rationalize it to themselves. Ben Franklin talked about how you can just rationalize away any evil and convince yourself that it's good. That's the power of the human mind. But yeah, at the end of the day, he has supported just some of the great evils, some of the most evil policies that we live under today.
Do you think that those two things kind of coincide, the inauthenticity of so many of these politicians and kind of the rise for authentic politics? Do you think it was just enough people realized that you can be a nice guy in a nice suit and still be a monster, so they stopped caring about the nice guy in a nice suit part?
Yeah, I think you probably put your finger on it. I think that's a big part of it. Once we begin to realize that, I mean, it's like the Trump-Obama dichotomy, right? Obama was, genuinely seemed like a nice guy, very personable, very charming. And, I remember thinking when he was running in 2008, like, geez, I just want to like this guy. Like, he's like, there's just something about him. But at the end of the day, he was more than happy to have a secret kill list and assassinate American citizens abroad and expand the wars and violate his campaign promises to repeal the Patriot Act by fighting to renew the Patriot Act and expand surveillance powers on the American people. Now, Trump did some of those things too, but I think, but ultimately, at the end of the day, comparatively to certain past presidents, Trump didn't start any new wars. And I think, but there's this interesting dichotomy, right? Like, would you rather the polite gentleman who is dropping bombs on millions of people and starting wars overseas? Or would you rather have the guy who's more interested in dropping Twitter bombs on his enemies and being like a jerk online and less inclined to, he'll call Kim Jong-un Rocket Man and, threaten to like drop nukes on him. But then at the end of the day, he's willing to go over and try to negotiate and get us out of this, like this long Cold War with North Korea. Got stabbed in the back on that by people in his own cabinet, but like John Bolton. But it's like at the end of the day, I guess Trump's style is not my style, or that the kind of aggressive style isn't my style. But if I'm getting more upset by Twitter bombs than I am about real bombs, it seems like I'm losing my sense of proportion about things.
Ooh, that's a more apt sentence than just talking about Trump. that applies to a whole bunch of things in the liberty movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really am a fan of this kind of, what we're talking about here, where people care less about the prim and proper and they care more about the actual person and the issues. I do see an issue with that though, because it's not too difficult to be inauthentically authentic if you know what you're doing. If you've got any kind of manipulative background in like sales or business, like, anything like that. Yeah. So I feel like in my mind, Trump is a good example of that, where, he was
a bit of
authentic.
A bullshit artist. But it's kind of like, I guess with Trump to a certain degree, it's like he was a transparent bullshit artist. Like everyone knew he was kind of a bullshit artist. And I think maybe that's why people gave him a little bit more leeway. Now, I guess some people there's Trump derangement syndrome on both sides, right? There are the people who Trump was wrong on everything, no matter what it was, and Trump was right on everything, no matter what it was. Mm-hmm. This is like a symptom of our politics where we have stopped looking to principles and issues, and we're more just worshiping personalities and obeying whatever they say is, that's what our new political ethic is. Whatever Barack Obama or Donald Trump says, we are for or against, depending on how we feel about them personally. Mm-hmm. And that's a dangerous place to be.
Yeah. That's something we have to watch out for in the liberty movement too, because we have that issue with people like Trump and Obama, if it's, everything they say is wrong. And we have the opposite with like Ron Paul or, other various people within the history of the liberty movement. Not to actually shit on Ron Paul, but just to, everyone has their fuck ups. Everyone writes something that, or says something that maybe didn't come out right.
People are human beings. And I think one of the things that sets the liberty movement apart from maybe some of these other populist movements that we've seen in recent years is Ron Paul was always pointing towards a higher set of principles that, I always look back to in 2012, all the different candidates came out with all their different books. You go in the bookstore and it's like, oh, here's Hillary Clinton's book. How do you know it's her book? Her face is right on the cover. Here's Mitt Romney's book with his face right on the cover. Here's Rick Santorum's book with his face right on the cover. Here's Ron Paul's book with the U.S. Constitution on the cover with the Federal Reserve. It was about the ideas. It was never about him. And I think Ron, to a certain degree, I think that Ron always kind of felt uncomfortable when people tried to make it about him. He I don't think he ever wanted that. It's a role he was willing to serve in, but he was always trying to point to something bigger. Like if he really wanted to make it about himself, like would he go on the debate stage and like talk about, the Mises Institute and like Austrian economics when people are like, what the hell is this? Like, he's trying to, point people towards something bigger, which, and that means at the end of the day, how Ron Paul applies those principles on a particular issue in a particular way. Like we can agree or disagree with that. We should be questioning these things. But we should always be measuring against those foundational principles. So someone might have a different interpretation than I do on how we apply the principles of liberty when it comes to, I don't know, you pick any issue under the sun. Police is like a hot button one right now. But that doesn't mean, I respect as long as we're coming from the same principled place. That means that we can have a conversation and dialogue about it. And maybe I learned something from that person. Maybe they learned something from me. I don't have such a big ego that that I don't think that there's a lot to learn from others. Everyone's got something they can teach you.
For sure. And those kinds of conversations are how we learn. Those we have way too quick of a reaction to try to argue and be negative and assume that the person is a moron and a statist.
Yeah, especially social media these days. That's kind of what that's just the culture there. It's like you can't live with social media. You can't live without it. There's very little. People just want that rapid response, and controversy is what gets the likes, right? It's you don't get kind of attention when you're like going like, wow, this person makes a really great point. Like I do that all the time. I'll listen to like Dave Smith and I'll be like, wow, Dave Smith makes a really good point. I'll put a tweet out about this. I'm like, what a great point Dave Smith is making on this thing. But people like it when you're saying, wow, this guy's an idiot. Look at what he just said. And I understand it, but it doesn't bring out our better natures.
Yeah. If you're bored and you want Twitter engagement, criticize Dave Smith. That's a good way to get it. He has a little army of people that'll just hop right up on there.
And to some degree, it's a testament to Dave's, really his ability to spread the message and communicate it to people. Yeah, like, more power to him. I really appreciate all the new people he's brought into the movement. And it's always, when you're new in the movement, you're always kind of hot to trot and ready to like go to bat because you're still working these ideas out for yourself in a lot of ways. And it's in some ways, I think when you're new to the ideas, it's easy to be a little bit less secure in kind of your when someone attacks your ideas, you feel like you're personally under attack because you're not secure enough in those ideas yet. That takes some time.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to the backup of his little Twitter army if he is to be our nominee in 2024. Like, it would have been nice to have that army fighting for Jorgensen because we were getting roasted.
Yeah.
Just every day, Twitter was a shitstorm during that.
Oh
campaign.
yeah. Oh yeah. It's a total new environment. We gotta, it's like Donald Trump became the president because of Twitter. Like it's something that can't be ignored anymore. And we've got to have strategies for how we, communicate and put our best foot forward in those spaces, even if they are toxic cesspools.
For sure. So we've talked a little bit about various BS dichotomies, but I'm going to create one here in this question. And if you had to focus on and work in only one area, would you work in elections or legislative work?
That's an interesting question because I kind of see them as going kind of hand in hand. It kind of seems like for me that it would be hard to separate the two of them, at least because the reason that I was effective as a legislator, in addition to, I think, putting forward thoughtful policies and trying to work with my colleagues in good faith and build coalitions and all kind of some of the traditional legislative work we think of. Part of my effectiveness was that, we had an activist army of liberty-minded people in my state who were willing to call and put pressure on the politicians to vote the right way and threaten their elections if they didn't. So that's how we got constitutional carry passed. We got even many Democrats to vote for it because they got enough calls from constituents who are very insistent and that they vote for this. And politicians start to worry about the re-elections if you get enough of that. So it seems like if I were to just say legislative work, well, then I would become a pretty ineffective legislator, or policy person real quick. You could do a lot of the policies that aren't controversial. You could try to fix a little thing here, nudge a little thing there. But on the big issues that we're really facing, if you cannot back up that policy push with a threat to the re-elections of these politicians, you're not going to get very far. And so, I can't separate the two of them.
That's fair. I feel like because I'm honestly asking this question almost for myself, and many of my friends who are kind of debating where they actually want to put their effort in the liberty movement. And you have a position at the moment and have for a couple of different chunks in your career where you were able to work on both effectively simultaneously. But like coming up, you kind of have to pick a path. Am I going to work for a PAC that does door knocking, or am I going to work for a PAC that does picketing and legislative education?
Right.
You kind of have to.
Right. So you're saying that if you recognize that both sides of that coin are going to get done, which side of it do you prefer to do? So if I could accept someone else is going to do the election work and I could just focus on the legislative work, I'd probably say the legislative work. I think that one thing I've learned is that I have a real knack for kind of working these kind of delegative bodies from political conventions to legislatures. I've been able to figure out, where to put which politicians to put pressure on to get our freedoms back, and how to build a coalition there, and from getting major policies passed in my state to helping to orchestrate kind of the Liberty Republican takeover, the Ron Paul takeover of the the Maine Republican Convention in 2012. These are all kind of a lot of similar skill sets, knowing how to work these deliberative bodies.
Yeah, I'm starting to just dip my toe into some of that stuff, and it looks like a lot more fun than knocking doors, I gotta say.
It is, and it does require a bit of a specialized skill set. And I feel like knocking doors is kind of like it's kind of like eating your vegetables. It's not always the most enjoyable part, but if you want to grow big and strong, you got to do it. So you got it's you got to get the people involved if you're gonna get things done. So
yeah, It's funny you bring up the correlation between the conventions and the legislature, because I don't hear those two compared very often, but it makes a lot of sense that it would be a similar. You're still whipping votes in a very similar way.
Yeah, you're whipping votes. You got to understand rules of procedure. Robert's Rules of Order or Mason's rules in at least my legislative bodies. So yeah, it's very similar principles. And I think the big thing is at the end of the day is if you know the rules and you know how to use the rules, you can get a lot of things done. Because most people, if you go to a political convention or you go to even a state legislature, most people there voting on things have no idea how the rules work. They're just following scripts that other people have given to them. So if you actually understand the rules, suddenly it's your court, and you can make things happen that other people didn't even know was possible.
Yeah, I learned that lesson mostly this year. I got elected to the Libertarian Party of New York State Committee in January of this year, and nothing attributed more to my descent from libertarian to anarchist than joining that committee. but I had to learn Robert's rules, and I already kind of understood Robert's rules because I'm a nerd. But learning how to my state chair likes to call it he calls it procedural jujitsu when people are fucking around with him, because he's a decent guy, but he's an asshole during meetings in the way that he has to be to chair a meeting, and he's very like by the book. And so if you do it right, and you're going against him or just like doing something that's annoying to him, but you're doing it right, he won't stop you, and he has to just let you do it, and you can see it piss him off as you're like making the motions in just the right times and doing the things and calling the right questions. And he's like,
it's kind of a little bit like being a Jedi, it's like you get all these, it's like you have the powers of the Force of Robert's Rules of Order that's just like a mystical power to other people. They don't know how you're doing it. It's like, you just got to read the book and understand how it works. Like this is how in 2012, this is how we won caucus after caucus in Maine, and won delegates to the state convention, the national convention. It was that our Ron Paul supporters on Robert's Rules of Order. We trained them on the things that they needed to know in order to make sure that they were treated fairly in these caucuses that were oftentimes run by hostile chairs who were, more on the establishment side of things. And we were just a bunch of these Ron Paul radicals who we weren't even really Republicans. What are we doing here? And yet we were able to win time and time again because we knew the rules better than they did. So if anyone wants to get involved in that process, learn the rules.
Hell yeah. That's why we basically ignored Iowa on the Tulsi Gabbard campaign. We just fucking gave up for two reasons. One, it's too big of a state. It's so much bigger of a state than New Hampshire that like just manpower wise, it was easier to cover New Hampshire and work it well. But also we just knew going into it that the getting people to caucus for us and take like their entire day to go do this BS process was not our voter base. The kind of people that care a lot and are involved in the democratic process in the Democratic primary are not the kind of people that were voting for Tulsi Gabbard. So we didn't even bother.
I wonder though, because people might have thought that about Ron Paul people back in 2008 and 2012. And it turns out that the caucuses were our real strength, because the caucuses created a process for like that gave an advantage to people who, you could vote harder. The intensity of people's passion measures like whether or not they will show up to a caucus, whether they will sit through it, whether they will become delegates and go through, work their way from caucus to convention. Now, there are the establishment people who are used to it, but geez, all these, Ron Paul grassroots who are just like full of like piss and vinegar and ready to fight for.
Oh. Did I lose you? Well, guys, if you're intrigued by the stuff that he's saying, you guys can join in the fun at yaliberty.org. You work for an awesome organization that helps push liberty all across the country. Did I spell that right? Yes, I did. Okay. We're going to see if we can get Brakey back here. But Yale is great. I spent a good chunk of last year working with them and getting to door knock or make calls all over the country. He died. This is 2 shows in a row, guys. I don't know what we're doing. At least this time it's not my internet. It was in the beginning. Now it's not. We're going to give him a second. But also, while you're waiting, you guys can go over to nuggofknowledge.com. Grab some premium quality cannabis. We've got some Delta-8, some CBD, some CBG. You can get all the awesome things. Use promo code FSM and you'll get 10% off your first order. Then you can use promo code F4L and get 10% off your next order. Because we each have a promo code. And you can order it in all 50 states. It's completely legal for the most part in most of them, and delivered right to your door. It's the best way to get premium, high quality cannabis to your door all over the country. I'm not sure what happened to Eric. We're going to give him another minute to come back. Maybe I'll edit this out. I don't normally do that. I'm going to keep pitching sponsors. Nope. Here we go.
Hey, I'm sorry about that. I guess we figured out whose internet was the problem. My internet just literally died, and yeah, it's the NSA again. I'm certain. So now I'm going my phone data. So hopefully that won't be a problem again. Sorry about that.
No worries. I just pitched sponsors and yeah.
All right.
Except I completely lost my train of thought where we were. Caucusing for Ron Paul. Yeah, you guys had a really strong, active grassroots campaign. That movie that you played at Rev about the Ron Paul campaign was really cool. There was a lot of stuff about that I didn't know.
And that's it's funny. It's kind of the double-edged sword of having a largely youth-driven movement. It's like awesome that there's so many new people always coming in with so much energy, and this is exactly what we need to have a growing movement. But the danger at the same time is like there's so much history of our movement that we risk losing, and I can't think of anything more important than that. The 2008 and 2012 Ron Paul campaigns, which I really think are that's the historical foundation of the modern contemporary liberty movement as we know it. And all those folks who kind of, I mean, at a certain sense, it's just kind of amazing that there was the official campaign and there was the grassroots, and the official campaign did great work, but so much of what that movement was outside of that official structure, and just regular people hearing Ron's message saying, yeah, damn right. We got to end the wars, end the drug war, end the Federal Reserve. Like, these systems are corrupt and evil, and we need liberty. And what I love about those days, and I think the way that the Ron Paul movement differed from like say the Donald Trump populist movement, was that it wasn't just a middle finger to the establishment. It was also about what we were for, the kind of world we wanted to try to build and achieve. And it inspired people. It gave people hope.
I had Carrie Wedler on the show a little while back, and she said he loved liberty more than he hated the state, and I think that's a really important key of why Ron Paul's message was so strong. Yeah,
because ultimately it was a positive message. It was, look at all these bad things going on in the world, yes, but here are the things we can do about it. There are ways to fix these things. Here's actual things we can do, not just nibbling around the edges, but proposing like real solutions. Ending the Federal Reserve, restoring the gold standard, stopping the plunder, ending the wars. I mean, it was a very hopeful message. you wouldn't think so. People tend to think of Ron Paul as like, he was so doom and gloom with all like, the financial crisis is coming. It's like, no, the message was the financial crisis is coming, but we can do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, one of the things I think that happened between 2012 and 2016 is, I realized that there were a lot of people who supported Ron because of what he was for. And there were a lot of people who supported Ron because of what he was against. At the time, he was the biggest middle finger against the establishment, but he also had an inspiring message.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in 2016, we saw that kind of split, that a lot of the people who were just against what Ron was against became some of the early adopters for Donald Trump, because he was the biggest middle finger to the establishment. And he was against all the right things a lot of the time. But if all you are building your coalition around is what you're against, you got to be careful, because maybe what they want to replace that with might be worse than where you are right now. And I think about, or ultimately at the end of the day, they can't get the job done.
Yeah.
So you think of I think of how Republicans won election after election opposing Obamacare. But when it came time, when the people finally gave them an opportunity to put Republicans in power, they couldn't repeal Obamacare. They didn't have a plan for how they were actually going to fix healthcare. And so it all fell apart. And here we are with still Obamacare today. So that's the problem of a coalition that's just built around what we're against. We gotta have a positive message as well.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of things that spun off of Ron's campaign, tell us about the Defense of Liberty PAC and what you guys did with that.
Wow, that's ancient history. In some ways, I suppose you could say what we were attempting to do is similar to what Young Americans for Liberty is doing today. It was me and my political partner in Maine. His name is David Boyer. We were both grassroots field coordinators for the Ron Paul campaign back in 2012. And we noticed that, we had a few good legislators in our state legislature, including a guy named Aaron Libby, who I just interviewed on my podcast, Free America Now, just this past Monday. And he actually, when you look at some of the things he was sponsoring on the state level back then, you're kind of like, you'll notice a trend. He was like sponsoring constitutional carry. He was sponsoring Defend the Guard. And this is before really anyone was doing that, when they were just kind of just nobody was talking about these issues. He kind of really helped create a model. And we realized that we had some few good liberty legislators, and we thought maybe this is a path where we can start to make a difference. We can take this grassroots movement we built in Maine, and we can apply it towards going out, knocking doors, getting Liberty Ron Paul style legislators elected. And in 2012, we had mixed success. We got our incumbents reelected. Sadly, some of the new folks in that Obama wave, we didn't get some of the new folks we were hoping to get reelected. But I learned so much on that. I learned by working with different Liberty state legislative campaigns. I learned what worked, what didn't work, how to actually win a race. And then I took that and I applied it all when I ran for state Senate 2 years later, beat a Democrat incumbent who'd been around for a long time. It wasn't supposed to be a winnable race. And we smashed it. We won it by, landslide.
Nice.
So yeah, sometimes you learn a lot from success, but you can also learn a lot from failure. And some of the races where we didn't win in those early years were the races where I really learned this is how not to run a campaign. Don't spend your money on a bunch of T-shirts and knickknacks that you just hand out to people and hope that somehow translates into votes. No, you got to go out there. You got to knock doors. You got to send mail. You got to do the retail politics, and you got to meet people where they are. You got to talk to people on the issues that they care about and ask them what they care about, and then talk with them about how liberty's the answer.
Yeah. And I think that learning from failure bit goes back to what we're talking about towards the beginning of this episode of like kind of reassessing what is the best thing to be doing for liberty right now. Because if you do that reassess and it's not the thing that you're doing right now, that doesn't mean bad things. It doesn't mean a complete failure, because it most likely means that you learned a lot that you can apply to the next area that you're going to try to tackle.
Yeah, even if all you were doing is wasting your time and learning Robert's Rules of Order and all these dysfunctional, party committee meetings, at least you learn some Robert's Rules of Order out of that. Now you can apply that to something useful.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, because I think that when people get into the movement, they kind of pick a thing, and they have their couple of issues that they care about, and they get involved. They try to get involved. Whether or not they're actually able to get involved is always a question for off the bat. And then they try to they don't try new things, and they don't switch gears very often. And most of the people that I talk to, like on this show, most of them have done 6, 7, 8 things before they got to the thing that got them popular. And now I know who they are, have them on my show. So it's interesting, the kind of dichotomy between, there's people that I know that are in their 60s, 70s, have been in the movement since, the party was founded or something like that, but they've just kind of been doing the same things, and no one knows who they are, and they haven't actually changed anything. The people that have like royally fucked up and failed and like driven businesses into the ground, started half a dozen PACs and, a couple nonprofits, and done a couple of other things, those are the people that found success in their failures, and then in their later successes.
I mean, when you think about it, there's oftentimes not too many lessons to learn from success, other than, I guess I'm awesome. I guess everything I'm doing is great. It's the moments of failure when you really have to stop and assess and figure out what could I be doing better. Is this a sound strategy in just the wrong time? There's so much to learn and question. And in a certain sense, I think that a lot of the things that I could point to as big successes in my 10 years now in the movement, from a certain sense, it all depends on the angle you're looking at it at, right? So my goal in 2012 was to make Ron Paul president of the United States. And we failed at that. Ron Paul didn't become president of the United States. But along the way, we took over the entire state Republican Party. We, elected people to the national committee to be a thorn in the side of Reince Priebus, the, chairman of the RNC. We accomplished a lot of other things along the way, because we set our aim very high, and we accomplished some subsidiary goals. And after that, I decided, I saw how much power there was in the liberty movement, and what we could accomplish when we had an effective plan, and we motivated the grassroots, and we executed it well. And I decided, all right, I'm going to give the next 4 years of my life, I'm going to try to make Rand Paul president of the United States. What a failure I was at that, right? But along the way, just managed to get elected to the state Senate, serve 2 terms, pass constitutional carry, expand medical cannabis laws, get welfare reform done, pass right to try, serve on the Republican National Platform Committee, like fight for, trying to get, got some good things in the platform, and made the case on a national stage for non-interventionist foreign policy, and some of these things that the platform committee has never had to debate before. There are all these kind of these smaller victories along the way, so I just say, aim high, and you'll accomplish. Aim high, but also try to accomplish realistic things, and always make sure that there are built in lesser victories you can score along the way.
One of the kind of trends that I notice in a lot of those things that you're talking about is the lack of half-assery and the quickness to pull the trigger on things. Like you, even with the Ron Paul campaign and a lot of that grassroots stuff, you hear people say that they want to do things like that. And very few campaigns actually have an organized grassroots outside of the campaign that is doing the thing. Right. And then with the PAC, and then your campaign, and some of these other things, it's things that people talk about a lot, and think about and theorize about, but don't actually like do the thing and create the PAC, run for the office, win the race, actually do it. What were some of the things that inspired you to actually, pull the trigger on like organizing for Ron or creating the PAC?
Yeah, I had the benefit of learning from some really awesome people along the way. So I always think about Michael Moresco, who you may remember. He was in that documentary He was the guy who biked across America for Ron Paul in 2008.
Yeah.
And I had the benefit when I was living in New York City after college, involved with the local grassroots Ron Paul scene there called the New York City Liberty HQ. A few notable figures kind of came out of that Liberty community there in New York City, including like Austin Peterson. And
interesting.
Yeah, no, I learned from some interesting people along the way. And I was just a guy who just started showing up to debate watch parties. And thankfully I had people who said, hey, you should volunteer and you should help us table in Union Square and you should take on these small tasks and get bigger tasks. And then the snowball gets rolling. You find you're helping to run the whole thing. And then you're on the Ron Paul campaign and it just kind of keeps going. It's like there's an old saying, how do you eat an elephant? You do it one bite at a time. You can look back at the long journey and wonder how in the world did I do all of this? But it really, when you were doing it, it just seemed like a little, one step at a time. Didn't even necessarily always know where the path was going, but you just kind of keep a destination in mind and go for it and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah. It's interesting that you specifically said debate watch parties, because that is both the first ever like successful thing I did in politics was put on a debate watch party, and how I got involved in the Tulsi Gabbard campaign was by showing up to a debate watch party. Apparently those work.
Yeah, it's how you bring a lot of new people in. People who, I mean, it's, people want to cheer on. It's, I guess, kind of like sports a little bit. Our tribalism. People want to cheer on their guy with other people who, like their guy. All of us kind of getting together in this like loft in Soho. Or it's like this like warehouse space. It was like but it's like we're all together. We're watching Ron. We're cheering him on. We're booing, Rick Santorum and it's that kind of communion is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the second time that we, as the NYC LP, put on a debate watch party, we actually co-hosted with the New York City Neoliberal Club, which was really fun because it was the second debate. And the debate where Tulsi took out Kamala Harris in that very epic
awesome
slam.
moment.
And the whole room, all of us, unanimously erupted into applause because the one thing that we can definitely all agree on is Kamala's a cop and fuck the police. Like the whole room is in unison on that issue. So it was really amusing and also a really fun event. We had like 75 people show up between the two clubs, and we got to meet a bunch of people, and a couple of like friendships turned into actual political alliances that helped us actually do some things in New York after that. So
that's awesome. When you can find areas of common ground on important issues, there's always an opportunity to build something there with people who might not always agree with you on everything else that's important to you.
Yeah. So I assume that your acting history has helped with this, but how does it feel to be on some of these larger stages, like state legislatures and on these national stages, arguing for the issues that you've been arguing for?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helps with, my big breakthrough when I was, I spent 10 years of my life doing theater before I ever really got into politics and more than just kind of beyond just being a hobby. The biggest breakthroughs, I remember the biggest breakthrough I had in theater that was very helpful for me in pretty much everything in life, especially in politics, was realizing that you're only good when you go out there and you're not afraid to make a fool out of yourself. And just accept, at any moment I might make a fool out of myself. And if it happens, that's happened before. I've made a fool out of myself before, but it happens. You laugh about it and you go on, and you know what? People respect that. So it's helped with, stage fright. It's helped with, I don't get afraid in front of audiences anymore. I remember the first time I stepped onto a stage as like a freshman in high school and just like shuffling around and just being really just insecure and not knowing how to stand in front of people and communicate. You get that beat out of you pretty quickly. You do enough theater. So So that was very helpful. But also at the end of the day, people often think that acting is about acting. They think it's about you're being fake and insincere and you're, putting on this mask. But really acting is about listening. It's about having a genuine, heartfelt response to what's happening in the moment in front of you. And certainly learning that has been incredibly helpful in politics and communications, in going door to door and talking to people. Actually, oftentimes we don't realize how hard it is to actually listen to someone. We're not just like waiting for our turn to speak. We're actually listening to someone, what they care about, and responding to them in a genuine fashion. That's something that's missing a lot in politics these days. And anyone who wants to really, represent people, it's a very important lesson to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, the stage fright thing was big, and still is sometimes, even on the show every once in a while, like especially doing the intro when it's just me on the screen and I'm like doing the sponsorships or whatever. I'll like rush through those because I'm like, A, I don't want to bore the audience. B, I don't want to like have my guests just sitting there in the green room while I'm yapping to myself. And but I was speaking at Tulsi Gabbard events fairly regularly, and that kind of broke some of it out of me. But yeah, that it's a big I guess hurdle for people to jump through when they start getting into politics, is you need to be able to talk to people.
Yeah. I find that talking to people is a lot easier than talking to myself when I'm doing a solo podcast. It's like, I can't tell you how many times I've done like a solo podcast on my show where I get like, 20 minutes in and I just start like second guessing myself, and I just like stop. I'm like, no, I'm going to start over. And it's like by like the third or fourth time you're doing it, you're like, all right, I got a problem. I need to have someone to talk to. Otherwise I drive myself crazy. So I don't know how.
I stopped doing solo podcasts for almost that exact reason. I haven't done a solo one in, I do them every once in a while if there's like an issue, but they're rarely longer than 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and I find like if I do that, I've got to really have it mapped out. I've got to, know exactly what I'm talking about, and got to have like a whole like structure to follow in case, because the mind wanders, I start going on some tangent and I don't have someone else in the room to pull me back. So anyway, having a conversation with someone's a lot easier, and oftentimes I think a lot more fruitful, right? More than just what you bring to the table, what someone else brings to the table, what you guys throw in there together and talk about. I think that's what's interesting.
Yeah, I quickly realized with my show that there are a lot of people in this movement that are way cooler and way smarter than me, that it's so much more beneficial for the people watching to get to hear from them, and not just me. Like there's just so much knowledge out there that we, to your point earlier, with being such a young and high turnover movement, we lose a lot of it. And so I kind of refocused my goal of the show as being kind of a repository for that. There's people that have been on my show that aren't in the movement anymore, that have like rage quit the movement and are never going to teach anyone anything about liberty ever again. And it's like,
but you've got that episode.
At least I have an episode with them where they might be able to learn something, except for people probably don't want to watch it anymore because they don't like the people. But hey, that's up to you.
Yeah, it is nice. You do wonder sometimes when you record these, just how much, how long they'll last for. In a certain way, kind of podcasts, oftentimes podcasts are kind of like, they're kind of disposable sometimes, especially when you're just talking about current events. But then you kind of look back on like, you find like that like rare piece of footage of like F.A. Hayek, talking on camera somewhere. And it's just like, God, I wish that podcast existed back then.
Right.
You kind of wonder a little bit. Yeah, you are kind of creating a bit of a repository for these conversations. This is who we were in 2021. This is what people this is what we were fighting for. Let it not be said that we were silent and we just, rolled over and took it.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch people kind of change throughout the course of the show, including myself. Just like the descent from libertarian into anarchist, and my various opinions on different politicians. I was actually just on Reed's show and brought up the fact that I have an entire 45-minute episode called The Rand Paul Show, where I talk exclusively about how awesome Rand Paul is and the different bills that he wrote last year. That's it for 45 minutes. Meanwhile, I've also called him like a rhino and a Trump brown noser and like many other names on the show, both before that episode and since. But yeah, that's definitely one opinion that's actually he's getting better again. Like my opinion on Rand Paul is always changing.
I can, when it comes to Rand, I can, and there's sometimes I have some usually small disagreements with him sometimes. But I personally feel like people often don't give Rand enough credit. I know that he hasn't been perfect sometimes. And I know that I think he would admit he botched that presidential run by, trying to be more, establishment friendly. Mm-hmm. And that would turn out to be a failing strategy, and I'm sure he knows it. And he seemed miserable throughout that entire presidential campaign. Sure, he wasn't having a good time, but but the fact that he is where he is, the fact that he used his influence. I mean, the fact that people call him a Trump brown noser, and maybe that's one way to describe what he did. But at the end of the day, he brown nosed Trump well enough to keep us out of a war with Iran. Mm-hmm. Like Rand wasn't trying to get close to Donald Trump and be Donald Trump's friend and back Donald Trump up because he wanted his own ego stroked. It wasn't because he wanted power. It's because he wanted to use his position as best as he could to advocate for these ideas we care about. And I'm convinced that if Rand Paul was not there, if Rand Paul had not done what he'd done, that John Bolton would have gotten his war in Iran. And so and I think kind of, especially with Rand Paul being called all kinds of names by people who didn't like Donald Trump in the Liberty movement for doing what he did. I get that. I get why people feel that way. But I also think, to some degree, I think that was Rand Paul swallowing his pride and saying it's these issues that are really important. And I mean, when you think about how nasty things got between Rand and Donald Trump in those presidential debates, I'm sure that stung. I mean, Rand's a human being, and I think he's in this for the right reasons as much as anyone on the federal level anyway. And to swallow your pride and say, all right, I guess I got to be friends with this guy who was, Donald Trump was laying personal attacks against people in those debates. And I think Rand put the country first by keeping us out of that war.
Yeah.
Didn't let personality politics get in the way.
Yeah, I definitely, as much as I disagree with how he went about some of those things, I do respect that he was able to do it. And I agree. I think he's the sole reason why we aren't at war with Iran right now. I give the entirety of the credit of that to Rand Paul, for sure.
Yeah. And it's kind of, it's kind of interesting. Like we don't, we don't always appreciate the bad things that didn't happen because, someone was in the right place at the right time. We had a liberty champion in the state legislature who blocked something terrible, or in Congress who helped block something terrible. But it's the seen and the unseen.
Yeah, it's kind of the curse of the liberty movement, or one of the many, is for the most part, when we're doing our jobs right, it's not noticeable for the exact reasons that you're talking about. It's because we're blocking government overreach. We're saving people struggle that they don't know that was coming. And we can get some big flashy victories from time to time, though. Seeing constitutional carry spread across the whole country is pretty damn cool. That has been really reassuring. One of the biggest white pills of this the last couple of years has been that, and that's mostly thanks to you guys. Or
Yeah,
not most,
well,
but-
yeah, well, it's thanks to the Liberty Movement, and Young Americans for Liberty is part of that. And yeah, certainly in recent years, Yale's been doing a lot of work there. But it's like if you go, even before Yale was involved in this, you go into any state where constitutional carry passed, I guarantee you, at the center of that, you're going to find someone from the Ron Paul Liberty Movement who was instrumental in that. I mean, certainly in Maine, that was the epicenter of it. And in New Hampshire, it was the Liberty Republicans over there, the Ron Paul guys over there, in all these states as it's unfolding across the country. And it's because I think the Liberty movement is particularly, we're a movement that understands that we're not going to sit around begging for permission to get our rights back from the federal government. We recognize it's a failing strategy. We're not going to wait for the Supreme Court to tell us we can have our rights back. That's a failing strategy. These are politicians in robes. Okay. We got to use the populist grassroots power that we have. We got to operate in a decentralized fashion. That's our strength. We're never going to succeed at taking over the centralized power structure, but we can, from the bottom up, start to take over the decentralized power structures of this political system we have in the state legislatures. And even if you just get a few good people in, you get 5 good people in a state legislature, those 5 people can sponsor bills, call roll call votes, and unleash the forces of the local grassroots liberty people on the politicians to get them to do the right thing. You can get a lot done. And it's amazing to see this strategy just unfold and play out over the last 10 years. And I think that we can continue applying this across the states on so many policies. And I'm excited for where things are going.
Yeah, for sure. Nullification is by far the most effective strategy for change, at least in my opinion. Whether that's nullifying gun laws, nullifying tax laws, nullifying
that's why marijuana is effectively legal. I mean, we kind of have still the formality of it's not legal on the federal level, but at this point, it's like, I mean, obviously there's still there's still bad things, banking laws, and still bad things from the federal policy. But at the end of the day, it's like you go to almost any state in the country and you can at least get access to medical cannabis. There's only a few holdouts there. It's just the state saying, we don't recognize your authority. And that was a combination of Liberty Republicans and progressive Democrats working together, getting that done.
Yeah. It's nice to see that coalition built. I think that's one of the better issues that has built coalitions, especially when we're talking about medical. It gets a little bit trickier when we get into recreational. You start to lose some of those Republicans.
Yeah, you do start to lose some, but it's also, I mean, medical was always that's why that was pursued first. It was always the easiest sell. But yeah, you do lose some. But at the same time, you look at the way things are trending. I think you have a majority of Republicans now, when you poll the country, a majority of Republicans now support adult use cannabis being legal. It's the battle is already won. As far as I see it, it's not coming. It's not, the full victory is not being achieved as quickly as we might like to see. But I think it's a foregone conclusion. Marijuana is going to be legal in all 50 states at some point in the near future.
Yeah, I'm technically smoking legal cannabis right now because growing and giving away is currently legal in New York, and that's how I got this. I didn't purchase it, so and it's legal to consume. The weird thing about New York is they legalized public consumption with the intro bill. So anywhere that you can legally smoke a cigarette, you can legally smoke a joint.
Is that interesting? Was it one state where it was, I thought maybe it was New York, maybe it was California, where it's like as they were legalizing cannabis, which is a good thing, they were also like criminalizing smoking tobacco in even in private apartment buildings in your own apartment. And I remember Reed Cooley, the vice president of communications here at Young Americans for Liberty, came up with this great line. It said, it's the first time in America we can imagine the police busting down your door and saying, that better be weed you're smoking in there.
That's great. New York is really strict about that kind of stuff. And I think that's one of the reasons why they were able to pass this. If we didn't have all of the restrictions on where you can and can't smoke a cigarette, this would have, I don't think they would have added this, but we already have, you can't smoke within 100 yards of a school. You can't smoke within 50 feet of a door. You can't. And then in New York City, there are actually a whole bunch of regulations on unless you own the property that you're in. If you're renting, you can't smoke cigarettes or now I would assume in that regard, cannabis would be still included in that.
Yeah,
so
that's crazy. It's like, just let me work out an agreement with my landlord. Leave me alone.
Right. Which is what most people in the city do, but it's still technically illegal to smoke a cigarette in an apartment building because, there's like long-term damage and, you're affecting the person above you. Possibly it's getting into the vents, whatever, blah, blah, blah.
Sounds like a bunch of nanny state rationalizations.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a bunch of libertarians argue for this kind of crap because it's like, if the smoke is going into your neighbor's apartment, you're violating their private property and and it's like, okay, but we don't have to solve that by just
right. It doesn't need to be a top-down thing. Right? People can know, when they're signing the lease. Am I signing a lease for a building that, for a place that allows smoking? Is this going to be a thing? As or not? I mean, you can work that out through private contracts. You don't need to get the state involved.
I feel like that's we get to say that sentence quite often. That could be solved without the state, guys.
It's like everyone says that, like, oh yeah, we only turn to the state as a last resort, and then you just kind of have flashbacks to like George W. Bush saying war is a last resort. It's like, I don't think you really mean that. Because it seems like the drop of a hat, you're starting a war. The drop of a hat, you're turning into the state, rather than trying to, see what we can do to solve our problems together as voluntary, involuntary interactions. I'm not a total anarchist. I think there's some, role for the state, protect life, liberty, and property.
We'll get you eventually.
Yeah.
It is nice to see kind of this disillusionment on the left get kind of amped up as well. You're seeing a lot less, or I mean, maybe not a lot less, but you're seeing less of the fight for 15 and more of like fights for unions and fights for walkouts and stuff like that. A lot more of a direct action approach, even from the left, to solve a lot of their issues, like workers' rights and stuff. It's nice to see it. For me, at least, a lot of my left-wing friends are shifting in that direction and stopping like begging the state to force a good job on them and just go out and find a good job or fight for your job,
build your own
better.
thing.
Or build your own thing.
Yeah, I think that more and more people, I think that our generation, I don't know, at least would you be Gen Z?
I'm a millennial by literally a couple of days, but yeah.
Okay. So you, me, us millennials, we get a bad rap. A lot of people say, but in the millennial generation, for everything that we've been through, financial crisis, student loan crisis, they basically, they're forcing us to pay for these entitlement programs that are going to be insolvent before we're old enough to, collect on them. All these national debts kind of taken out in our name before we were old enough to vote. Like so many ways that the millennial generation has been screwed over. But at the same time, it's like kind of have to be one of the more entrepreneurial generations. I mean, this is the generation that pioneered Bitcoin. It's like we see that this financial system is screwing us over, so we go build our own parallel financial system rather than demanding that the government try to fix it. We've been demanding that forever, and nothing ever gets done. It's not so. I think, one of the lessons I always think is a valuable lesson is I remember, this is another lesson I learned from theater, like being in college and everyone auditioning for the big production for the semester. And sometimes you get cast and sometimes you don't get cast. That's not in your power. You can put the best version of yourself out there. Maybe you just don't fit the role, or maybe there's someone who's better. And I remember it's like it's like two categories of people who, when they didn't get cast, they'd complain about it. They would, and they would just complain about it, and they wouldn't do anything productive with their time. Well, if the system doesn't pick you, you go out and build your own thing. Like that's what I always loved. It's like, all right, I would get together with all the misfits who didn't get cast, and we're going to put together our own damn show, and it's going to be better than that other show. And half the time it was. So it's like, it's a great lesson in politics, or it's a great lesson in life. Like, you can sit around and you can wait for other people to give things to you. And sometimes it might go your way. Sometimes it might not. But the really true great thing about living in a free society, or what little we have left of freedom, is the freedom to go and build your own thing when the system doesn't hand it to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point there with Bitcoin. And you pioneered the idea of combining Bitcoin with politics a little bit with your campaign, and getting involved with the NYC Bitcoin Center and actually incorporating that into your campaign. Another example of actually pulling the trigger on things that a lot of people go, "Ooh, I wish I could do that."
Yeah, I was first candidate in Maine to take cryptocurrency donations back in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to like, I had to call up the Maine Ethics Commission, which is what oversees kind of campaign finance stuff in the state. And I say, all right, how do I do this? How do I be in compliance with reporting? They had to like write whole new rules for me. So I guess I created some work for some bureaucrats. I'm sure they appreciated that, but it's kind of, but all these years later, it's kind of amazing to think that, while I'm a big advocate for like the political path and the things we can do in the legislatures to fight back against tyranny, we haven't had so much success on the political path ending the Federal Reserve. And there's a whole bunch of folks who went out, said, I've got a different path. We're going to start this competing digital currency. And gosh, these guys might actually end the Federal Reserve. Good for them.
Yeah. And if anything, it's definitely aided in the political mission to end the Federal Reserve.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It undermines their whole system is based on a monopoly on the currency, and this just undermines it. Why would you, in the long run? And I think people are going to wake up to this more and more. Why would you hold your savings in dollars when it is, even in the best of times, depreciating at 2% every single year? I mean, that's the goal. The goal is we're going to steal 2% of your money every single year. And we're going to tell you that's normal and natural, and that's the way it is. Why would you hold on to that money when there is a secure cryptocurrency on a decentralized blockchain that is increasingly more and more functional for everyday transactions, with advancements like the Lightning Network? You can do transactions for very quickly, for just fractions of pennies to do these transactions. In the long run, why would anyone choose dollars over Bitcoin? It's not going to last, especially the way things are going now. We're seeing 6-7% inflation. People are going to wake up real quick.
Yeah. And with this whole other option, by breaking that monopoly, you're not only giving people an out to effectively, vote with their dollars, to show their discontentment with the current system. You also have a whole class of people learning about the problems with the monetary systems because of this. You have a whole bunch of 16-year-olds with thousands of dollars worth of JPEGs on their computer that are learning about why the dollar is corrupted and terrible, and why you shouldn't put your money there, that no other generation has had.
Yeah, you got Jack Dorsey, who I guess just left Twitter, but he's tweeting out like Mises.com articles, what happened in 1971. You've got, it's amazing. I got a book right here, The Bitcoin Standard. It's by Saifuddin Amos. I might be mispronouncing his name. I was just working at a coffee shop on my I'm writing op-eds very often. So I'm just there, writing an op-ed, and I've got this book on the table, and two separate times from two separate people in the course of just a couple hours. Someone comes over to me. It's like, I saw that book. I want to ask you about Bitcoin. What's going on with this? Like, and then the one guy wants to borrow the book for an entire hour. He's just over there flipping through it. Like, these are young people. Like, people recognize that people are curious about this. They might not necessarily know how to jump in and get started, but people are realizing there's something really rotten in our financial system. And I certainly, I'm glad that these lifeboats exist now. I mean, can you imagine if we were approaching this huge economic crisis that is coming, and we did not have these lifeboats, we did not have these competing currencies, because otherwise the only choice would be to get wiped out.
Yeah. Yeah, and these lifeboats are really important, and I think it speaks to, we were talking about like elections versus legislative work, and the greater dichotomy normally is made of like politics versus activism versus like counter economics or whatever. These lifeboats are extremely important, and I think it's definitely a both and thing in all of those questions, but we need a couple more of them. We have like Odyssey as a lifeboat from YouTube, Float, I guess, is a lifeboat from Twitter, Bitcoin as a lifeboat from the dollar. There's a lot of other monopolies and things that we need to build up lifeboats. We need to build up a way around our healthcare systems, imminent collapse. There's
and the lifeboats there, we need a lot more of them, but the lifeboats there are things like direct primary care, kind of opting out of this third-party payer system, and as much as possible trying to work directly with doctors, pay directly for services where you don't have to pay the inflated costs of all the bureaucracy. But yeah, no, like everything is in all the policies coming out of Washington, D.C. are about having power over these systems drift towards the center. And we need to find ways, and whatever avenues we can, whether it's political paths or non-political paths, agorism, whatever, we need to find ways to pull back against that, and to at least try to decentralize these systems, at least with how we vote with our dollars. And if not, and also how we vote with our votes.
Yeah, 100%. So before we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to shout out Young Americans for Liberty, tell people how to get involved with them, with other things that you're working on, how they can find your podcast.
Obviously, you can learn more about Young Americans for Liberty at yaliberty.org. It's a great org. That's why I work there and advocate for them. I think I know so many new young people who've come into the Liberty movement over the last decade because they got involved with their Young Americans for Liberty chapter on their college campus. And whether they continued working with Young Americans for Liberty as they, continued down their own path, or they went off and did their own great things. It's a great organization. Learn more at yaliberty.org. You can follow me on Twitter at Senator Brakey. And you can also check out my podcast, which we just released our 65th episode. We do it every Monday through Friday. It's called Free America Now. We've had great guests on, like Glenn Jacobs, the mayor of Knox County, Tennessee, who was just on recently. It was our top performing episode ever. Nice. Tomorrow, I'm going to have Bob Murphy of Contra Krugman fame. Just had Maj Touré on recently. We were talking a lot about liberty and how, his work to kind of bring the liberty message to, Black urban communities in America, which is a place where, we really need to connect with, we really need to spread the liberty message. And he's a great ambassador. And, he's from those communities. He knows how to talk with folks there. So anyway, we have great conversations on the liberty move from across the liberty movement on Free America Now, and people can subscribe and check it out on all their favorite podcasting apps. And Monday through Friday.
All right. And that link is in the description for everybody, as well as the link to Yal's website. So go, if you are a young American and you care about liberty, go sign up at yaliberty.org. I'm going to throw that back up as we close out. Eric, thanks so much for coming on. This was great.
Yeah, good talking with you, David.
Yeah. Everybody, thanks so much for watching. We will be back here next week with Reed Coverdale and somebody else whose name is escaping my brain right now because it's late and I had a long day. But if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like this video, share it with all of your friends, and go follow us on all of the other social media platforms, and then come back here next week. And until then, keep up the fight.